So I do want to just take a moment and thank you guys for bringing me out again, for the Greenberg Scholars and for Brittany and Nigel. It's been amazing. It's really great to be here. And I've been learning a little bit about your school, and you guys have a gorgeous campus, and it's really great to be here. So what I want to talk about today, I think you guys got a sense of the stuff I've done, is certainly movies. I've got 3 features. Boys Don't Cry was one. Then I did Stop Loss, which was partly inspired by my brother, who, at this time, I'll bring it up now because I was out protesting the Bush election. I was canvassing for Gore, trying to get votes in Ohio when that all fell apart. And I was in New York when the World Trade Towers were bombed. And it was devastating for me as a New Yorker. I actually saw one fall because I was staring at it, and my brain couldn't catch up with what I saw. And my friends all came over, you know, artists, academics, and we had spent the day together. And we spent the next few days because when you were in New York, they had cut off access downtown. So if you lived below 14th Street, you just stayed down there. We ended up going to peace vigils, thinking that that's what we were, you know, just kind of trying to bring peace back to New York. And my friends who were more political, a little bit older than me, said, you know, we're going to go to war. And I had never experienced what war was. It made no sense. Why would we go to war? And I said, no, that doesn't make any sense. So we were, I had no idea what was coming. We ended up being kind of in the New York Times, holding up a banner that says New York is against war and for peace. And very quickly, the drums of war started beating, and I found myself going to anti-war marches, thinking there's no way we're going to go to war. And I remember the hangover that set in, that we were up all night, and at 6 a.m. we started bombing Iraq. So that was a stunning time for me. It was heartbreaking. And then on top of it, my baby brother, I'm Italian and I'm Jewish, so it's unusual. Not a lot of Jews in America, you know, sign up for the military. But my mother called and said, your baby brother has enlisted and he's going to war. Can you talk him out of it? And I called him up and he was just like, don't try to talk me out of it, or I won't talk to you. But basically he went to war, and as he was being trained to be a soldier and learning the language of killing and warfare, we were texting, at that point it was IMing, and it was breaking my heart so much, so I ended up making a movie that very much dealt with that. And so the Channing character, Channing Tatum, was kind of unknown at the time, and my brother had said, you know, I don't know who you're going to hire, but you're not going to find anybody in Hollywood who is like a guy. They're all, as he said, pussies. It'll be the operative word of it this evening. And he said, so don't hire a pussy. And I said, okay, I won't hire a pussy. And we ended up doing a lot of auditions, and a guy walked in, that hunk, who didn't really have much experience, and his name was Channing Tatum. And, you know, he auditioned, and I have a lot of experience working with actors, and, you know, he was kind of green, and I thought, I'm not really sure if I can get this performance out of him. And I was like, what else can you do? And he said, well, I can do this. And he did a break dance. And it was pretty hot and charismatic. And you know, I'd cast Hilary, and, you know, she had won the Oscar for Boys. And so I have a sense of kind of, you know, where the charisma is. And he was extraordinary. And it ended up, you guys don't really know this, but in Hollywood, you don't hire somebody to carry a movie if they don't have the experience of what we call carrying a movie, which means that you can open it and they can make money. So it was a big deal when I went to Scott Rudin, and I said, this guy is like the soldiers that I've met. He's hunky, he's charismatic, he has that thing that Hilary has. And Scott said, well, prove it to me. And so we made a tape, and, you know, long story short, we got him hired, and it was a very early movie of his. So I was very lucky to do that, and then I ended up doing, as you saw, working on Carrie, and then since then, as Nigel said, I've been doing some really extraordinary television, which I want to get into talking to you guys about, because I think that it's really important at this point to start to understand what it means to make content sort of in the world that we're moving in. But what I want to talk about tonight actually has to do with, oh, and yes, I will talk to you about 6, which I do with Walton Goggins, and I Love Dick, which is really fun. It comes from Jill Soloway with Kathryn Hahn and Kevin Bacon. But there's 2 issues that I want to talk about tonight that are extraordinarily important to me. And in fact, I was supposed to come here 2 weeks ago. We've been trying to figure out a date. And when I first wrote this lecture, you know, for you guys, I did it with the assumption that we were going to have a female president. And so it was very interesting in the last 2 days to go through the shock and the mourning process of what happened, and to actually have to retool the speech to acknowledge that we don't have a female president, why we might not, and how that plays into these issues. But the issues that are so important to me, first of all, it's something I've been working on my entire career. I've been working on kind of my whole life. Really, if you look at Boys Don't Cry, you see that I started this as an artist very early on. I've always been very political. As Nigel said, I'm in the Directors Guild. I'm actually on the board. I'm on the negotiating committee. I'm in the Academy's board. I do a tremendous amount of work around this issue. And the issue is inequity and inequality. It is just the profound driving force of my life. And it's going to be hard to kind of, I'm going to deal anecdotally with you guys, and you guys are academics, so at any point after I'm done, correct me, tell me I'm wrong, make a better case than I made. So I may speak anecdotally sometimes and speak generally, but it's really to get at the heart of the issue. That to me, inequity, I'm interested in inequities of power, inequities of safety, inequities of voice, people not having access to being heard, that results from gender identity, race, sexual preference, sexuality, ethnicity. Any inequities are, to me, very, very interesting. And I do believe that what I want us to do is to reach for a kind of equality, parity, and representation. And I want to use the word intersectionality because I think it's really, really important. And I'm going to get much deeper into this, but I do a lot of work in Hollywood about trying to give equality and equity to people. And my biggest frustration is that people talk about it in separation. Right, so my black friends are talking about, which is horrifying to me, when the cops are beating up a person of color. My women friends are talking about why women aren't working enough in the industry. My trans friends are talking about trans issues. And I really feel that we are at a threshold moment, and if we look at this election, it is proof that if we would all stop seeing ourselves as separate groups and we would work together, there is an intersectionality and a commonality, and it's the only way we are going to upseat what's been going on that's causing inequity. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is storytelling, and I would call that Hollywood and beyond. I've been obsessed with storytelling since I was a little kid. When I found out that there were cave drawings, it sort of blew my mind. In my own house, I always carried a tape recorder. As I said, I come from a Jewish and Italian family. Those women can talk, and they can fight, and they can argue. And I would always be in the car recording them. And then they, and I didn't hide it, and they were like, why are you recording us? And I was like, I don't know, because it's kind of amazing. You guys tell the same story over and over and over. But they were always funny, and they always talked quick, and I always felt a kind of musicality to the language that they used, and I loved it. And I thought, I want to be as good of a storyteller as Grandma. I want to be as good of a storyteller as Mom. And I kind of thought that somehow by listening and duplicating it, then I might be. That then very much made me fall in love with radio, TV, movies. I'm going to use a term for you guys. It's called over the top. You probably know what the term is, right? You probably don't know what it means, and it's going to be a big deal in your future. So over the top means anything that comes to you in your house above the television. Not the television. I know this is crazy, but this is going to be the new term for internet content. It will be called over the top. So keep your ears and eyes out for it. SVOD, AVOD. I'm going to talk about these as we get into things. So SVOD is subscription video on demand. That's going to be Amazon, and that's going to be Hulu, and that's going to be Netflix. AVOD is audiovisual on demand. So these are going to be terms that, again, I don't want to bore you with them, but they are kind of relevant to your future in terms of content. This is something that I feel strongly about. Storytelling that we've always had, that I work in Hollywood, has always had the power to reflect and reinforce the social. Right? So people tell stories about what they know, and if there's a social out there, whether it's good or bad, it's going to get reflected. If you're reflecting the bad, right, if you're reflecting, say, an unfair situation where people of color don't have power or women don't have power, and you're duplicating it, when you reflect it, you actually have the ability to negatively reinforce culture. Right? So you might have culture flourishing somewhere that's more equitable, but because you're telling stories where people aren't being shown in the way that they should be shown, you actually could be sending things backwards. And then I'd like to make the argument that, in fact, you actually can change culture as well by either reflecting things that are equitable and equal, or by showing something that's even more advanced than what we're seeing if something is unfair, right? So I think what I'm really arguing for is the power of storytelling. It's always been there, and it's something that I'm really very, very committed to. So let's take a little bit of a deep dive into inequity and inequality. That, to me, is lack of fairness or justice, right? In the way that we distribute money, the way we distribute rights, security, opportunities. That's basically the powerful having power that the people who don't have power don't have. right? Who are those people? Again, I'm going to speak generally because I'm not an academic, so I get to make these mistakes. Women, right, don't necessarily have power. Queer people don't necessarily have full power. Trans people, people of color, right? What's interesting to me is that inequity and inequality takes many, many forms, and we have to be very alert to seeing it. This was something we were just talking about in our discussion. It can take a physical form, right? So people without power and or representation, they get killed. They get raped. They get beaten. They get imprisoned. They get muted. They get silenced. They get weakened, and they get contained. So sometimes I will bring up a statistic that maybe references women. I now need us to extrapolate a bit that I'm just trying to get at a problem and we don't have days and days to talk about it. So sometimes I'll give you a statistic, but it's to kind of say that this is sort of what the trend is. So here's one, as I particularly am interested in the women's issue. The Women's Health Organization. 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. Think about that. 1 in 3 women. That is a global health problem of epidemic proportions. I can tell you anecdotally, as a woman, most of my friends, and think about it, most of you here are white, we're at a really great college, we're all the 1% or some version of it, we're very, very privileged. Most women I have known in my lifetime have been at the other end of some kind of sexual abuse. Just a given. So, it happens abroad, right? We can read about it internationally. It happens here. It's been happening since the beginning of time. Sadly, it's still happening now. The world is not necessarily a safe place if you don't have power. That's why equity and equality matters, because it's dangerous if you don't have it. But also equality and equity can take on forms of how we talk about people, how we represent things, how we treat people. So that's something to think about. I'll use a couple quick examples. Let's look at the national stage, because we just had an election. So Hillary, for months leading up to the election, I believe that we had a front row seat to a raging battle of the sexes, eruptions of gender and sexual inequality, sexism, and rage. So think about Hillary, how experienced she was, how qualified she was in politics and government for decades. She was in public office for at least 10 years. She was Secretary of State. Trump said she had been doing this 30 years. I mean, that was also when he said that she started ISIS. So he said some dumb things. But I think that there's no doubt that Hillary was wildly qualified to do the job that she was aiming to do. But think about some of the comments that were said. I don't know if you guys recall, but people said she didn't sound right. So men of every political persuasion, even her own party, complained about the sound of her voice. She was too shrill, she was too naggy, she was too loud. They said she didn't look right. An anonymous GOP congressman tweeted, "She comes across as my bitchy wife or mother." And I don't know what his wife or his mother thought about that, but that wasn't the nicest comment. Britt Hume of Fox said, "Hillary's face is not necessarily attractive. She had the wrong attitude. She was too angry, she was too lazy, she worked too hard, she didn't smile enough, she smiled too much. Some people said she looked like she'd been drinking white wine when she smiles." So these are funny. She was mocked for basically allowing her husband to philander and not leave him. What do all these things have in common? They may sound trivial, but they simply are not things that you would say about a man. And that is really interesting to me. In this day and age, we are saying things about her that you simply would not say about a man. And sometimes it was visible, and sometimes it was not. Now let's look at Trump. For years, women who worked with him in the pageants that he controlled, people that were on airline flights with him said that he groped them, he kissed them, he grabbed their breasts and butts, and he walked in on them in dressing rooms. A former Miss Utah said that Trump kissed her on the mouth more than once when she was 21, and others at the Teen USA pageant said that he walked in on them when they were naked. So we heard it for ourselves with that tape. I don't know how many people listened to it. I didn't think I would, and then I thought, you know what? I got to listen to this damn thing. And I was shocked. Quote, "I moved on her like a bitch, but I couldn't get there. She was married." Quote, "I'm automatically attracted to beautiful women. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything." I mean, it really did defy my expectation and my imagination. And I'm a writer. I don't know that I could have written that. It was pretty fucking brilliant. Now let's look around the entertainment business, because that's the business I'm in. Bill Cosby. So for around half a century, from 1965 to 2008, he got away with tranquilizing and raping women. Women didn't come forward. It really wasn't appropriate. They really couldn't. When they did, they were paid to keep quiet. And basically, many people in the business, and I'm not putting my business down, because I think many people knew about the allegations of rape and sexual misconduct, and they kept it quiet. So for years, he got away with it. And even when it was exposed, it never reached a cultural critical mass where people did something about it. For years. This is shocking to me. So, I believe, are at a moment of cultural upheaval. You would think, based on what I just said, there is no change and we're stuck in a completely repressive, misogynistic, sexist culture. I do believe we are on some level. But I do believe that there is change happening, and I think that there is an upheaval that is coming. I do believe that gender, race, and sexual inequality has been exposed, and I do believe that people who were silent are now speaking out, and people are beginning to push back. I have a very optimistic view of progress, but it includes regress. I think that we make headway, and I think that we fall backwards. And I do believe, because many of us are in mourning about what happened, it's something that we really have to embrace, that we're in a time of upheaval, and we haven't reached the end goal. So now look more recently at Trump, right? The pussy grab tape came out, finally. For years it hadn't. Trump tried to defend it by saying that it was behind closed doors, closed bus doors. It was locker room talk. But basically, most of the media exposed it as lewd and predatory behavior, and you felt that there was a critical moment when the culture agreed, right? You could go from channel to channel, and it was basically said, this is not cool. I don't think 10 years ago the tape would have come out. I don't think 10 years ago you would have had the critical agreement. So I think that that's progress. Billy Bush was fired, and people tuned in droves to watch him basically lose his job. There's something cool about that, right? There was a celebration. The newest line of Trump hotels, before he was president, weren't going to use his name. I don't know what's going to happen now. The last 5 SNLs, again, that's in a bubble, but the last 5 SNLs basically made fun of Trump and exposed the sexism, and there was a commonality of the laugh. In order to get the joke, there has to be an agreement. I don't believe that 10 years ago you would have had that. Interestingly, 10 years ago you had a lot more race jokes, because I think that people were starting to understand just how racist America was. And look, many people hoped that Trump's exposed sexism and misogyny was going to be enough to take him out of the candidacy and put Hillary in, and it was not. But I do believe, as I say, that it is a moment of upheaval, and I think the sheer fact that there is an exposure and that there is a dialogue is hope and is the beginning of change. Look at Cosby. In 2014, Hannibal Buress basically referenced what Cosby had been doing, and it was an open secret in Hollywood and among comedians. Tina Fey had been making fun of it very carefully for a while, because if she had made fun of it anymore, she would have lost her career. What ended up happening? 50 people now have come out against Cosby. There are lawsuits against him. He's lost his career. He may go to jail. Again, is misogyny and sexism over? No. But are we starting to expose it, and is it starting to get in trouble for people? Yes. Nate Parker. Now this is an interesting one, because this is a little bit more of an insider. How many people know who Nate Parker is? 2. How many people know what Birth of a Nation is? 10. That's fascinating to me. So I'm going to tell you, because I'm a person who has judged Sundance a couple times. That means that I go in and I'm on the jury for the dramatic competition. I watch all the movies, and I have to be very careful with my votes. A lot of people try to solicit me to vote for them, and it's bullshit. I don't do it, right? But I'm very aware of the politics that go into all of this and how the companies come and they buy movies at Sundance. So Birth of a Nation sold, this is important that you guys know this, the highest figure ever at Sundance, $17.5 million in a bidding war with Netflix. Netflix offered $20 million. Nate Parker likely said no, because Fox Searchlight, which released Boys Don't Cry, is the preeminent studio that you want to release your movie if you want to get an Oscar. They know how to release it. They know how to get the Oscar votes. So he went for Fox Searchlight. It was widely spoken of as the Oscar winner to be, right? It was a black film. We know that black films do well. And it was the answer to Oscars So White. I don't know if you guys remember, but it caused us a lot of problems. There were a lot of people that suddenly were like, the Oscars are so white. We had to have an emergency session where, because I'm an Academy voter, we had to change the dynamic of the representation of people of color and women in the Academy. And there's been a lot of debate about that. Anyway, so the bidders, Searchlight, Netflix, a few of them who I have the utmost respect for, these are like seasoned professionals. These people have been doing this forever. This is the game that they do. They know what they're up to. They knew about Nate Parker's rape allegations. they knew that his best friend had been found guilty, and they may or may not have known that the woman who was raped killed herself. But all that stuff was in the news for them to know. So what it means is that the seasoned professionals made a calculated choice. That black was going to be powerful enough that you could buy this movie and you could release it as an Oscar movie, because if you say anything negative about an Oscar movie, it's dead in the water. And it was going to be fine because the movie business was powerful enough, media was powerful enough. And that rape and sexual misconduct wasn't going to come back and get this guy. Now that is really, really interesting. Because what ended up happening was it didn't take long for these allegations to surface. Why? Because the media moves like lightning. It was out there to be found. It didn't take long. What ended up happening was Birth of a Nation was a colossal failure. So I would say that their assumption was based on the old world order, and I think what happened is the new world order, right? Things are changing. The allegations surfaced, people turned against the movie. It opened to what we call a colossal failure, $7 million. So if you spent $17.5 to buy it, typically you have to spend that amount of money to release it. I actually think that they had what we call a P&A budget of $20 million, so probably $37 million you were in. You might even have been in more. You open to 7, generally your movie is going to make 3 to 3.5 times that unless there's extraordinary circumstances. So you might end up at 21 million. I have a feeling they ended up at much less. So that's a big loss for them. Now I have to ask why. What could make sense of this change in the world? Certainly I think demographics is one of them, right? The underrepresented are just growing. That's all there is to it. And I wanted to be very careful that I didn't use language that was offensive to anybody, so I'm now just quoting NPR. NPR says, the country is changing. It's getting browner. As a population growth slows among whites, non-whites now make up a majority of kindergartners, and by the next presidential election, guys pay attention, the Census Bureau predicts that they will be a majority of all children, and by 2044, no one racial group will be a majority in the country. Well, we know that white people are right, it's becoming the minority. So I think the other thing is that the underrepresented are getting a bigger cultural voice. We may not have more gay people. We might not have more trans people. I don't really know what we had or what we're going to have. But we do know that people who have been underrepresented are getting more representation, right? You're hearing about them more in the news. Women, gays, trans, Africans, Americans are being more accepted and they're speaking out. And it's business. And this is fascinating to me. Years ago, you could make a racial slur, you could make an anti-Semitic slur. Even farther back, you could make an anti-woman slur. And it didn't really come back to haunt you, right? Because it was in some newspaper or it was on some nightly news. You didn't lose your job over it. Have you noticed in the last 5 years, you say something that you shouldn't be saying, and it creates a critical momentum, and then people lose their jobs. That's a good thing. I mean, that's actually a good thing. That's where kind of like there's a morality that can be kind of, I don't like the word policed, but it's something that you're being held accountable. So it's bad for politics, it's bad for business when you say bad things. So now let's get to storytelling, because that's the thing that I really love. So let's say we believe that there is inequity and there's inequality and it's dangerous and it's violent and that maybe it's kind of like opening up in our culture. Now let's look at what storytelling is. So this is what I love. As I said, I love cave drawings, oral tales, tales that are passed down through families. I love the theater. I love the idea of the amphitheater that we've had for 2,000 years. I love the idea that we created a printing press, radio, TV, film, digital, and as I said, over the top. Now the other thing I want to add in here is the reason I called the lecture Hollywood and Beyond is it's really interesting because I talk to a lot of people and they're like, well, Hollywood does this and Hollywood does that, and a lot of my academic friends. What I want to tell you as somebody who's inside the belly of the beast, yes, there is something called Hollywood. I live in Silver Lake, I've lived in Malibu, there is a Hollywood, there is a Beverly Hills. But it's really important that you understand there isn't one federation of Hollywood. It's an amalgamated group of people. It's somebody who dreamed of being a writer. It's somebody who dreamed of being a director. It's somebody who dreamed of being a producer. It's somebody who has a bunch of money because their father's a billionaire. It's somebody who is making movies in the foreign sector. It's independent financing the way I started Boys Don't Cry, but then it's the studio the way I finished it. It's really important for you guys that you understand that Hollywood is many, many things and that you really shouldn't simplify it as one thing because it's not. And that there are this loose federation, because I'm going to keep talking about that as I go through this. And as I said, I think that storytelling has the ability to reinforce bad culture. It also has the ability to change bad culture. And I think it can empower people. There was a very fascinating quote about media, and I think it's important that you guys hear this. I didn't have this in the speech before, but my friend Howard Rodman, who is the head of the Writers Guild, actually made an article in Variety today that I thought was really profound about media. He said, "We have, for the sake of ratings and revenue, conflated news with entertainment in the process, giving billions of dollars of worth of free airtime to the least qualified presidential candidate of our lifetime. In 2016, networks devoted more minutes of coverage to an email server than to climate change, jobs, to education, healthcare, poverty, infrastructure, all other issues combined. We are so blurred the lines between reality and reality television that our nation can scarcely discern the difference. There's blood on our hands." The reason I wanted to read you that quote is Howard is a friend of mine. Howard is a great writer, and he runs the Writers Guild. He is an insider of insiders. And he is saying, guys, we got to wake up and we got to put the finger at ourselves. And I appreciate that. But it also gives you a glimpse of just how powerful the media is. We created the platform that allowed Donald Trump to become the media star that he became. And then once you have ratings and once you have an audience, it is a behemoth that wants to keep feeding itself. So we fed it, and then we voted for it. And I think that's something important to keep in mind. And as long as I believe story is not reflective of the entire population, or is uncritical of inequality and unfairness, I believe that it will continue to reinforce the very inequities that we want to overcome. And that's really important. As long as we keep telling stories that reinforce the inequities that we want to change, I believe on some level media is going to keep reinforcing them, and we cannot make change to the culture. And I believe that media is getting more and more powerful. I do believe, as Kurzweil talks about, the singularity is near. I believe that culture, and again, I'm the layman, I'll get this a little bit wrong, I believe that we are moving at such a rapid rate of escalation, and media has such a profound influence in our lives, whether it's your phone, it's your Twitter account, it's your television. Beware of how powerful media is in your life. And that's as somebody who loves the media. And let's look at inequity, misogyny, and sexism that was exposed during the election and on the national stage, because I think that it actually is a springboard for the issue that I came to talk to you guys about, which is what's going on in my industry. And one of the reasons I wanted to set up this whole thing is I don't want you to think I just came here to talk about Hollywood, because I don't find Hollywood that important, but I actually find media making incredibly powerful and reflective of other social ills. So I'm going to make this brief, because I think statistics can be boring, unless you guys are statisticians. I know they make a lot of money. But I do think that statistics are important to just let you guys know that there is a real here. And I want to look at two very simple things. I want to look at people in front of the camera. That's the actors, right? The actors that you love. And then I want to look at people behind the camera, and that's people like me that you don't see. So Stacy Smith, USC Annenberg School of Communications and Journalism, looked at inequity in 800 popular films from 2007 to 2016. And what she found was female leads only comprised 21%. Now think about it. We live in an era where women are basically 50% of the population. When we have movie stars like Jennifer Lawrence, Angelina Jolie, Emma Stone, Melissa McCarthy, Cate Blanchett, Scarlett Johansson, Sandra Bullock, Charlize Theron. Do you know what a movie star means in my business? It means that you can open a movie. If you can open a movie, that means that you can make $100 million. Or it means you can make a profit. And that's a big deal, because that means you have to make back the budget and you have to make back the advertising cost. So these are bona fide movie stars. That means that they can open movies. So why are women only in 21% of the leads? It's a really important question to ask. But you're going to see that there's a continuing concern here. Minority leads made up 3%. Can you imagine that? So you're a minority kid. You want to go to the movies. What kind of example are you going to get about what your future is going to hold? 3%. Now let's go, there were no female leads or co-leads who are lesbian or bisexual. So I would just say forget about that as your future. You'll do that when you're reborn. Now let's go behind the camera. It's going to get worse, guys. I mean, it's hard for anybody to make a movie, but for women, it is impossible. Let's do non-directors, right? Martha Larson of San Diego State University. She looked at 250 films of 2013. 95% of the cinematographers were men. 89% of the screenwriters were men. 82% of the editors were men. So see how many women were getting those jobs. Directors, it's going to get really bad, guys. You're going to have a lot of empathy for me. There's a USC study, the same Annenberg study. It says, in the very best case, women direct feature films 4% of the time. 4 out of every 100. In the worst case, it's 1.9%. 1.9. Now think about that. You're a woman. You want to tell a story. You want to get hired.
you want to learn your craft. You need to practice your craft. You need to eat. You need to pay the rent. You need to earn a living. How are you ever going to make a living at this career? Even if you never have kids and you never get married, and it's the only thing you ever do. You're not going to. That's why you don't have women directors. It's not viable. At best, it's a hobby. So Amy Pascal, you guys ever heard of her? She was great. She is still alive, and she's great. She's a friend. One of the most powerful women in Hollywood. She was the co-chairperson of Sony Pictures Entertainment from 2006 until 2015. She knew and worked with everybody. Sony made billions of dollars during her tenure. She says in the New York Times, the lack of female directors is a travesty. For a woman to make a movie in Hollywood, you have to go through rejection after rejection after rejection. There is a mountain to climb with the whole system geared for women to fail. Can you imagine? She has spent her career, and that's her conclusion. The system is geared for women to fail. Just keep it in mind as we go on. TV is marginally better, but you have to keep in mind the director has much less power in television, because while we were making movies and making it a director's medium, the damn writers, I know this is being filmed, I love the writers, I'm a writer too, but what happened was the writers colonized television, and they created all kinds of titles and all kinds of power. We weren't paying attention, so it's a writer's medium. Women work at best 7% of the time. 7% of the time. In a population of 50-50, think about it, one way that you could correct this is, why don't we just hire people who have no experience? Let's forget about the people, who've directed an Oscar-winning performance, or who have committed their career to it, or have made money, or like Kathryn Bigelow. Like, let's just say we're going to get rid of the experience, and we're just going to say we're going to take two people who have no experience. Right? You should hire a woman as often as you hire a man. Annenberg study says 85% of the time you hire a man. 85% of the time you hire a man when all things are equal. That's bias. That's what we're up against. So, I am fortunate to have had a career and be working anywhere in the business, film, television, over the top, but this is really important. And this is why I'm so politically active. Just because I have been fortunate enough to be successful, it does not mean that there is not a systemic problem. And that is really important to understand, right? The exception does not overcome the rule. So just because one person works and does well, whether it's me, a Kathryn Bigelow, a Catherine Hardwicke, yeah, we got lucky, yeah, we worked hard, yeah, it happened, it may not happen again, there still is work to do. So now we get to the fun part. So this was the laboring lecture, and I had to deal with the statistics. So now I want to tell you guys some inside gossip and some anecdotes that I think are quite fun. So that's where the title came from. But I think they're very illuminary of what I'm talking about. My X rating. I got an X rating. Now we call it an NC-17 for Boys Don't Cry. So do you guys even know what an X rating is? Okay, I see some of the adults are shaking their head. Do you know what an X-rated theater is? Okay. Have you been to an X-rated theater? No. Do you know what an X-rated movie is? Okay. So back in the day, when I lived in New York and hung out in Times Square and took acting class and went to the adult bookstores and sometimes procured prostitutes, no, not really, there were, X-rated theaters. And they were great, but it's basically where the guys with trench coats go and they jerk off to the X-rated movie. I think it's great, and I think we should have them. But that is what they were. So even if you look at Taxi Driver, De Niro takes Sybil Shepherd to an X-rated movie, and she's a nice girl, and they walk right out. Okay, so let me take you back to 1999. Now, how many of you were born after 1999? Okay, that's good. As I thought you couldn't even remember that. I had fallen in love with a person who invented themselves into their fantasy themselves. That person you saw on screen, Brandon Tina, a female-bodied person who lived as a man and loved women and was raped and killed. I had to figure out the story, and I had to write the script. So to do that, just to give you a sense of kind of what my job is, I had to create a fully realized version of a character. And in order to do that, I had to interview transsexuals and butch lesbians. I had to figure out who this person was and what their gender identity was, because we hadn't seen it before. And to be quite frank, at that point, I've had boyfriends, I've had girlfriends, I was queer, and a lot of my friends were now passing as boys, and some of them wanted to be what we call an old school butch, which is a female-identified person who likes to be masculine, a female-bodied person who wants to be masculine identified but doesn't want to change their body. Some of my friends were starting to take testosterone and wanted to have transsexual operations. These were two very different types of people. I was somewhere in the middle. I was like, I don't know, I'm a tomboy. I like girls, I'm not sure what I want to do. Let me figure this character out as I go through this. What I ended up doing was I went online and I found a group called the Transsexual Menace. And they were amazing. Ricky Ann Wilkins, Tony Barreto Neto. It was a number of academics who were transsexuals, and they didn't have any publicity at that point. I mean, I had just found them on the internet, and they were taking a trip as a memorial and a service to Brandon Tina back to Falls City, the murder town. And they were like, you're lucky. One person dropped out. We have a ticket. It's $200, which was kind of a big deal then. But I came up with the $200. And I met them, and I had the most extraordinary time because I was a kid. I carried my camera, and they let me film them. And this was before there was any media, much media on transsexuals. And I filmed them for a couple days. We all lived together at a house. And I just asked them 8,000 questions. When did you figure out that you were gay? Oh, they were like, we're not gay. We're transsexual. Oh, okay. When did you figure out that you wanted to cross-dress? Oh, I cross-dress. That person doesn't. Oh, okay. When did you figure out? So I asked them everything about their mental state, about their biology, about their physical transformation, and it was extraordinary. And at some point, Kate Bornstein, who is a pretty well-known transsexual, and I became friends with all of them, but Kate really kind of took me under her wing, and at some point, she started calling me he. And all of a sudden, I kind of bucked up, and she was like, you like that? And I was like, yeah, I kind of do like that, because I don't really go by she. And then she called me he for a couple of days, and then I was like, but I don't really go by he, so I don't really go by either one. But it was a moment when she named me based on her own experience, and I began to understand what the transsexual identification might have been. We went to the murder town, we went to the murder trial. I got to watch Tom Neeson and John Lauder on trial, the people that I was writing about. I was able to meet Lana, who was the girlfriend. I was able to meet Lana's mother and have her retell me the meeting with Brandon, if they thought Brandon was a lesbian, what they thought of Brandon, the murder night, everything. And I recorded all of it. It was very extraordinary. And I developed an approach at that point, which I now use in my writing, which was very influenced by the reality that I was looking at, and also by Norman Mailer's Executioner's Song and Truman Capote's In True Blood. And that was, if you're looking at reality and you interview enough people and you hear a story over and over and over from every possible angle, you will on some level begin to know what might have happened. And it was a profound moment for me because the more I heard, the more my instincts kicked in, and I began to know who was telling me the truth and who wasn't. And so that's something I now carry through all my work. The next thing I had to do was get money, and that was very hard because I went to Amsterdam, and where you pitch 20,000 times a day, and everybody smokes Gauloise, and basically I would pitch them this story, and they were like, that's great, who's going to direct it? And I was a kid in grad school, and I'm like, me. And they're like, well, but have you ever directed? And I was like, well, no. And they were like, well, we need somebody who has directed. And I'm like, but this is how I'm going to direct. So you can't become a director until you've directed. Now add that on top of the 1.9 and the 4% and how impossible the job is. Christine, my producer, basically found money. We lost the money. She found the money. I finally quit my job, which was extraordinary, and we were moving forward towards making this movie, but the guys wanted Drew Barrymore to play Brandon. Drew Barrymore is an amazing actor. She's extraordinary, but she wasn't right for that role. She would have been right for Lana. So the next big challenge of making Boys Don't Cry was casting it. I needed to find somebody who passed on screen as much as Brandon passed in real life. Otherwise, you would have been looking at all the other actors being like, this is ridiculous. I don't buy this. We went to every butch lesbian, every transsexual, every drag king. I was friends with all of them in the community. And the hilarious thing is all my friends are begging me to have a party now because I have all the tapes that are like 16 years old of everybody as kids trying out. We went to actors, but professional actors wouldn't play it because at that point, no small movie like that had ever won an award of the caliber that ended up winning, and those movies didn't make a lot of money, so the actors didn't want to be bothered. Ellen came out in 1997. Maybe some of you remember. It was a great episode. And then Lesbian was cool. Then I got flooded with girls who wanted to play the role. And these straight girls would come in, and they'd come to my office, and they'd put a sock in their pants, and they'd try to act tough. And something was really weird, because I would be like, no, you got to like lower your, you've got to get your sex in your cock. You got to get it, lower your center of gravity. You got to, you got to walk like you fuck. And they just would look at me like, what is she saying? But they got very excited, and then they'd leave. Then they'd come back in, and they'd want another audition. They're like, I've been really thinking about what you said. That's really exciting. I really like that. So they got very excited, but they would come back, and they were no more butch. Right? So they'd kind of prance around, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to find any butches with socks in their pants with these straight girls. Like, that's just not happening, right? You can play age, right? But you can play ethnicity, but I don't know. Gender is like a different thing. So that wasn't happening. And again, I love the butch lesbians and the transsexuals, and they were great, but they didn't have the acting chops at that moment. Now, which is great, now that we're finally giving roles to butchers and transsexuals, they're getting the experience they need. The thing was, I didn't have a solution. So basically, we were 6 weeks out, and I went to Christine, panicked, and I was just like, I'm really nervous. It's been 3 years of looking for this person. I don't think that this person exists. I think they existed once. I think they lived, they died, and I think we're toast. So she said, okay, don't get scared. We're going to walk the plank, and we're going to see what happens. So we sent Carrie Barden, one of the greatest. Christine Vachon is one of the great living producers, and Carrie Barden is one of the great, amazing casting directors. We sent him to L.A., and we were just like, we don't care what you fucking do. You got to pull out all the stops. You've got to find this girl. So he was auditioning everybody. Everybody had socks in their pants. Everybody was prancing around. Like, it was just, I was so tired. I would get a stack of tapes, and I would just lay down, and I would just play one after another, and all these terrible auditions. Each one was worse than the next. Late one night, when I was completely bleary-eyed, there just was this person who floated across the screen, and I had to kind of bring them back, and it was like, whoa. She didn't pass as a boy. She had a square jaw, she had big ears, big forehead, huge brown eyes. But she did two things. One, she blurred the gender lines, so you were kind of like, is that a girl or is that a boy? She made you not know. And she was charming and charismatic as all hell. She smiled. And then I realized, all these other girls, when they tried to be like men, they got hard, they got tough. And that didn't work. Brandon must have been smiling to open people's doors. We still had to figure out if she could win people over, and if she could pass, so we flew her in, and she damn showed up with like long blonde hair and a ponytail, and it was like, I could not unremember that image. She's like, don't worry about it. I'm like, I'm worried. She put the hat on. She had the sock in her pants. And she ended up to 7 people, which is unusual. You don't typically do an audition to a live audience. You typically do an audition to one director, or you do it on tape. She did it all 7 of us, and we couldn't contain ourselves. There was an excitement in the room of this human being who was such a great actor and who could play with the gender role. So we ended up thinking she clearly was the best. I was terrified that she wouldn't pass because she still had the blonde hair and everything, and Christine was like, you got to give it a shot. She's all you got. I walked her down to the haircut place, Astor Place, down the street, and is where all the B-boys got their haircut. And I went to, the barber, and I was just like, and I had pictures of Matt Damon and Leo DiCaprio back then. They still are gorgeous, but they were young boys. And I was like, look how beautiful, make her look like this. And the guy just was like, no way. It was non-negotiable, he wasn't gonna do it. So I went to the female, barber, and I was like, please, here's the picture, please. So she finally was gonna do it. I was a nervous wreck. They cut the hair. We finished. All of a sudden, I looked at her and I was like, my God, she looks like Leo. It's kind of amazing. But the danger of the blonde hair was it was effeminate. So I was like, fuck. So I gotta get her masculine. I gotta get the hair dark. She had beautiful blonde hair. If you dye your hair, if anybody's ever dyed their hair and tried to undye it, you strip the hair. So I had one gamble. Would I leave her blonde and risk the femininity, or would I go brown and risk it if it didn't work? A, she had dyed hair, which Brandon couldn't have dyed hair, and I was going to have to strip her hair back. So I was a nervous wreck. We did it. We finished. We walked back through the East Village, which I had walked 1,000 times back and forth, on that street. And boom, it was Brandon. Spitting image of Brandon. So it was, at that point, it was a dream come true. But nothing is easy. We shot the movie. We went to set with, I thought it was $1.2 million. Everybody was throwing up and nervous. I didn't know anything. It ended up being, it was $700,000. We didn't have enough money. We didn't have enough time. The shoot was brutal. We picked up a financier for, IFP. It was extraordinary, but we were always flying by the seat of our pants. So then we came back and we're in the editing room. And we're totally out of money. And the movie, I shouldn't even say this publicly because I look incompetent, but the movie was over 4 hours long. There was 2 or 3 movies that I had shot because I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I had emotional truth, but I didn't know how to cut a script down. And we had 6 weeks to finish. It's not possible, guys. I'm just here to tell you. You can't do it. So I went to Christina. I'm just like, okay, look, everybody loves this movie. Whenever we show it, she's like, yeah, but Kim, people have to take 2 pee breaks. I'm like, I know, but it's a movie. People like it. So I said, there's got to be a way to make more money. And she was like, but there's not. We're under what we call a limited partnership. Very simply, limited partnership means you put money in, I put money in, you own 50%, I own 50%. Neither one of us wants more money put in. So I was like, there's got to be a way. And she's like, there's not a way. I'm like, there has to be a way. She's like, okay, there is one way, but it's never been done. And the way that it had never been done was basically, you have to finish this movie in 6 weeks. So you have to edit every day with Lee Percy. I was like, okay. If you can go and find an editor, qualified editor, tomorrow or the next day, who will work for free, who will cut when you and Lee stop cutting. Well, we cut 12 hours, there was another 12 hours, and then there was sleep. If you can do that before Sundance, which is in 10 days, we will take a trailer to Sundance and we will try to sell it, but it's never been done, so basically it's a fool's errand. Well, at that point I was up for fool's errands. So I did. I worked the day shift with Lee, I got an editor, she's gonna work for free, I worked the night shift, I cut nonstop. We ended up with a 20-minute trailer, they took it to Sundance. I'm like, great, I'm going to Sundance. No, you're not going to Sundance because you've got to finish the movie. So I had to stay, they went, a couple days went by, but I was exhausted. I finally get a phone call, and they're like, guess what? And I was like, I don't know, what? And they were like, we sold the movie. I was like, cool. They were like, well, don't you want to know who we sold it to? So you understand, I didn't know what Hollywood was, Hollywood and beyond. So I was like, sure, who'd you sell it to? But I didn't know who anybody was. And they were like, well, there was a bidding war. Miramax wanted to buy it. I'm like, okay, I know who that is. Focus wanted to buy it, and Searchlight wanted to buy it. I'm like, cool. So who bought it? They were like, well, we sold it to Lindsay Law at Searchlight. And I'm like, great. They were like, well, don't you want to know for how much? And I was like, yeah, for how much? And they were like, $5 million. I was like, you sold a movie for $5 million? I was like, we're rich. And they were like, no, you're not rich. Because we sold it as what's called a negative pickup, so that the studio made a promissory note of $5 million. The negative rate at that point was 2.1. I'm like, that's still $2.9 million. Yeah, I didn't see it. A lot of other people got rich. But that aside, that's why we're artists, because we really don't care about money. We care about the art. But what was amazing was at this point, we now had this sale. But we also had to finish the movie, and we had to cut it as quickly as we could. Now, this is something that's really important. This is going to go back to all the inequality that I talked about, which is we had to edit it. Brandon had passed as a boy on screen, right? The performance was powerful. Now we had to get the violence right. So think about it this way. Brandon had shaped himself into his fantasy of himself. He had lived and loved as a man. He had been beaten and raped all night and executed because he was a genderqueer person, right? Because he was different. My job in portraying Brandon was to try to bring him to life in such a way that he was comprehensible to people who did not understand him, which was most of the population at that point. And actually most of the gay and lesbian population didn't really understand transgender. I also had to have a portrait that showed violence, and this is really important, but encouraged empathy. I didn't want to ever show violence that was going to make a queer person feel that they were being assaulted by the movie. I also didn't want to show violence that was going to encourage somebody who had a predilection or an openness to raping or beating up people like a Brandon from doing it. Now this gets back to, remember as I said, the power of story. Story can reinforce the negative and make things worse. Story can turn the negative positive and make it better. My gamble was I could make it better. My terror was that I would have straight white guys, and again, I love straight white guys, but a particular type of angry straight white guy who was inclined to do this to Brandon in the theater saying, fuck yeah, I'm gonna fucking rape them. It was a profound terror of mine. And that is the terror that I have every time I create violence against any human being. So we screened the movie a number of times. The audience loved it. They didn't like the rape. My reaction was, good. Why would you like a rape? Christine's reaction was, Kim, your appetite for violence is profound and huge. You've been living with this story forever. You can watch a rape that goes on 10 minutes. They can't. And I said, they should. Brandon was raped all night. Why can't they deal with a 6-minute rape scene? And she said, you're losing your audience. I then hit a wall that I've hit 1,000 times in my life and my career, which is a good wall, which was somebody showed me something that I didn't even imagine was possible, but ended up making me grow as a human being. I thought, well, I don't understand. I have to get the audience to like the rape. I have to get it to be violent in such a way that they're not going to turn away from it, but I want to turn away from the rape every time I think about it. It was a really fascinating challenge. So I looked at the structure of my movie, and what I saw was she was right, and the audience was right. My movie was built on 5 brutalizations. Basically, Brandon was stripped, which essentially killed Brandon, because Brandon really loved being Brandon. The minute you stripped him and you exposed his vagina, then he was no longer Brandon. Okay, so the character dies. Well, one thing I know about drama is you can't kill the character and keep the movie going. Movie's done. Okay, then I had a rape, a vaginal rape, an anal rape, and then I had Brandon brought into the police officer, and he interrogates Brandon and kind of re-rapes him again. And then I had a murder where I killed Brandon. So I basically brutalized Brandon in very much this, I mean, not physically, but I brutalized the character the way the boys had brutalized Brandon. And I was like, wow, I have really fucked up. Then I thought, do I end the movie at the stripping? Well, that doesn't work. So then what set in was a fascinating period of real deep reflection and probably one of the big growth spurts of my kind of career as an artist. I thought, how can I be true to the violence without it being as long as the violence, because you can't do that? How can I not brutalize the audience and brutalize Brandon, but how can I take the audience through this arc? Anybody have a solution? Because it took me a while. It took days and days and days and days of being up all night processing this. Does anybody have an idea what we came to? Okay. Do you guys ever read the Poetics? Aristotle. I think you should read it. I read it like every year. So he talks about death of the body, life of the soul, right? That the character dies for us. And that just kept rotating in my mind, rotating in my mind, rotating in my mind. And I thought, is there a way to have physical violence against Brandon that doesn't register as physical violence? Point of view. Point of view is the only way. And then you start thinking about women, sadly, people who are disempowered, people, anybody who is raped or hurt. Oftentimes they don't fully remember and they don't fully experience what they're going through because they disassociate. Now, I don't want to say that rape is good and then that you can disassociate, but just say we do. If I could make it that we were going to follow this from Brandon's point of view, and therefore Brandon was always going to be alive as long as Brandon was alive, then that meant that Brandon wasn't yet dead. Therefore, what I did was I created what I call a canonical structure. So I basically have the stripping, right? Brandon walks out. Rather than have those series of brutalizations, which is where the repetition happened, and, this is going to be an important word, pornography. Pornography of violence is to brutalize, right? I jumped all the way to the police interrogation. So that the cop was interrogating Brandon, and it was only when the cop says, where did he put it in? And Brandon says, my vagina, which is the true moment of death. It's the beginning of the death, right? The beginning of the destruction of the identity. I then go back and I show you pieces of the vaginal rape, pieces of the anal rape. They actually never duplicate, and we emerge right back into the cop scenario, and the climax of the movie is my vagina, when Brandon actually admits that he has been killed. Essentially, the murder is a third act denouement, right? The character has already kind of been killed, and fourth act false solution makes the wrong choice. So that was kind of a breakthrough for me. And it also taught me how I was going to make films for the rest of my life, which was to think about structure, to think about character, and to think about the form that I work in. We showed it to audiences 7 times. What I did was I would show it. I would sit and film the audience, what Frank Capra did. I would make a questionnaire, and I would just say, what did you think of the rape? And I would actually say, did you like it? Did you not like it? Was it too long? Was it too short? I asked them everything. When did you hate Brandon? And I would just wash the answers over myself, and I began to see that every time I cut the rape shorter and I cut down the redundancy, they actually accepted it more and they liked it more. They never said we love the rape, but by the last time we cut that thing, what they said was, I don't like the rape, but I know it's necessary and I know it's doing what it has to do. And I'll tell you, my confidence in people and in humanity and in storytelling is profound, because the truth of the matter is, if you tell them a good story and you do it right, they get it. We all get it. We're all connected. So basically, that was how we cut the rape down. And we made it work, which was pretty amazing. So we had apparent success. Finished the movie, got accepted into the Toronto, the Venice, and the New York Film Festivals, which is the trifecta for an independent movie. We had an October 8th release date with Fox Searchlight, who wasn't yet the Fox Searchlight they would become, but we knew it was great. And as we were getting ready to go, I got a phone call, and they said I got an X rating. And I was like, cool, that's great. I got an X rating, I'm really proud. Because I had known like a lot of great filmmakers who had gotten X ratings, and I was like, this is great. And Christine was like, no, this is not great. And I was like, well, why isn't this great? And she was like, well, because you signed a contract that you have to deliver an R movie. And I was like, hey, but if I can't, I can't. She was like, no, that's not how it works. She was like, you have to deliver an R. And I was like, but if I can't? She's like, no, and if you can't, they can't advertise your movie. I said, so what? I didn't care if one person saw it. She's like, no, we need to advertise the movie, and we need to make back the money that they spent on the movie. I don't know if you guys know this, but if you have an NC-17 or an X rating, you cannot advertise in an American paper. You can't advertise in the theater. You're fucked. right? So I was like, oh my God. So basically I said, okay, so what did I get an X for? What was the infractions? Can I see the judgment? And she was like, no, they told your lawyer. And I'm like, they didn't write it down? No, they didn't write it down. Okay, so can my lawyer tell me? Sure. What were the infractions? Infraction number 1. Brandon wipes the cum off his mouth after he goes down on Lana. I was like, I got an NC-17 for wiping cum off your mouth? Okay, what's the next infraction? Lana's orgasm when Brandon goes down on her is too long. I got an NC-17 for an orgasm going on too long? The anal rape is too violent. They think you should admit it. Wow. Christine said, you're on a flight tomorrow to Venice. You need to go in there and cut this thing down. And I said, we just worked for we worked for like 4 months, 7 edits. The thing is perfect. I can't cut this thing down. I can't do it arbitrarily. She's like, all I know is I'm getting on the plane to Venice tomorrow. You're getting on the plane. You're opening up that editing room, and you are cutting as deeply as you need to cut to get that R, whatever it takes. I would ask you guys what you would have done. What would you have done? I went into the editing room, and I made, of course, 8 edits. 8 different versions of the movie. She wanted to kill me. But that was the only thing I could do, and I was just like, we're going to start from nothing, and we're going to go to something. So basically, we started with cutting, you know what a frame is? 1/24 of a second. Okay, so we cut 1 frame off the cum wipe, 1 frame off the orgasm, and 1 frame off the anal rape. And then they were like, you need to get fucking serious. So then I went back in and I cut half the cum. He half wipes the thing off. And then the orgasm, and I cut 2 frames, and then the anal rape, I cut, a thrust. And then I cut 2 thrusts, so then I cut the whole damn thing out. So I had these 8 different things. So basically, I made these cuts, and I then went in and I argued for the movie. So basically, she said that had never been done. And when I went in and I argued, the arguments that I made were, number 1, for the cum wipe, I said, because you had to argue in terms of story and character. And I said, well, first of all, it's unsanitary to not wipe your mouth after you go down on somebody. And it's even more unsanitary than kiss them. And that would destroy Brandon's character, and then the movie wouldn't work. Okay, that was 1. Number 2, the orgasm. I said, the orgasm. She's giving Lana pleasure. That's why Brandon is who Brandon is. And basically, that's the desire that we're trying to show. And then I said, and who's been hurt by an orgasm that lasted too long? They didn't argue with me. Then the anal rape. I said, okay, so we have an anal rape here. If I cut this thing down and I make it look pleasurable, aren't I condoning rape? I don't want to condone rape, so I need to leave it in. They didn't argue against me, and I thought I had won. And I called my lawyer, and he said, you didn't win, but you won. And I was like, I don't understand. He's like, you're about to lose by 1 vote, and that's because they saw the movie to begin with, and they thought it was pornographic. And I was like, but it wasn't pornographic. And he said, but that's what they thought. They now realize that it's not, but in order to teach you a lesson, they have to punish you and make you lose, and that's why you need to cut it down. So that was very interesting to me. So after I cut it down and I turned it in, I kind of had a big epiphany about all of this stuff that is very relevant to today. And that was, my movie was never pornographic. I actually looked up all kinds of different films. I looked at movies that had real X ratings, like for sexuality, which is putting sexuality in that encourages sexuality. That's like Debbie Does Dallas, right? That's Deep Throat. Those are pornographic movies. There are actually rarely violent pornographic movies because we have a huge tolerance for violence. Then I looked up at R movies, movies that got Rs that kind of seem like X's. So The General. There's a rape scene that goes on The General's daughter for 20 minutes. Now, why didn't that get an X? Because it didn't have gay content. And then I looked at my movie, and I realized it wasn't pornographic. It didn't encourage sexuality. I mean, it might have if that's what got you off. And it certainly didn't encourage violence. And in fact, they didn't even call the violence. We shoot Brandon in the head, and we stab Brandon. So then I started really trying to figure out what went down. And I realized that I had gotten an X rating, and my movie was called pornographic, not because it was actually pornographic, but because it was ahead of its time. And this is really important. If you push the social norm, if you go beyond it, then the culture is going to react, and it's going to say, we're not ready for this. And that's essentially what the MPAA is. The rating system is just saying, we're going to call this pornography because right now this is unusual and we don't understand it. But when I actually pressed them, though they couldn't admit it to me, the truth was the movie was human and the movie was responsible and it was all character-based. So we left having lost. We flew to Venice. And now we had the 8 cuts. We didn't know when they were going to approve it. But if they didn't approve it, I was never going to be able to show the real version of Boys Don't Cry. We went to Venice. We got a standing ovation. And we were a nervous wreck. And then we finally got the phone call that they had accepted it. I got my R. Now, to this day, I can't tell you. When I retire, I'm actually going to tell you what I really did. Because I did something extraordinary. Extraordinary in terms of my ability to protect the movie and what I did to actually show respect in order to earn the R. But if I say it, I would jeopardize my future in the business. So I won't do that. But I think what it shows you, God, I'm trying to keep up with my speech. My question is, what does this tell you about sexuality and gender and inequality and how story in front of and behind the camera shapes culture? Think about it this way. I showed 3 things. One was the cum wipe, right, and the orgasm. Those two kind of work together. Female pleasure, right? There was one woman giving another woman pleasure. There were 2 gay bodies being together, 2 lesbians. It was not pornographic, but it was beyond the social norm. So what it says to you is, in our culture, there is a profound anger and hatred and unfamiliarity around female pleasure, right? If a man was on the other end of that, right? If somebody was wiping their mouth over sucking his cock, you wouldn't have gotten an NC-17, right? If a guy was coming and coming and coming, that would have been hilarious. You wouldn't have gotten an NC-17. But you got it for female pleasure. Now, the gay stuff I understand. That was hard for people to, I mean, again, I can't really, at a certain point, one gets familiar, like if you're a person of color, you get familiar with people having a hard time with the fact that you're of color. If you're queer, you're just like, fine, I got it. You guys have a hard time with that. So I don't really want to focus on that. What I want to focus on is female pleasure. 50% of the population is women. Most of them are probably straight. You guys are going home with men. I would imagine men are pleasing you, right? I would imagine that's what they're supposed to be doing. I would imagine you're pleasing yourselves. So why is it so unheard of, and why is it pornographic to show female pleasure? That's something to keep in mind. So, another quick anecdote. When I was asked to direct a version of Stephen King's Carrie, I was torn. I love the original. I think it's a masterpiece. I'm friends with Brian De Palma. Like, I'm really friends with him, right? He's a big New Yorker. I lived in Little Italy. We used to go out to dinner all the time. I mean, he loves to go out to good restaurants. I'm super respectful of other directors, so I didn't really want to take on another director's work. In order to take the job, I needed 2 things. One was I needed to go back to the book and make it mine, because I didn't want to remake his movie. And there have been great remakes. You know, Seven Samurai is Magnificent Seven. Yojimbo is Fistful of Dollars. And I needed Brian's blessing. So before I accepted the job, I emailed Brian, because I was living in LA. And he was like, well, we need to Skype. I mean, it was really funny, because it's like he's always on new technology. And so we had a Skype, which was very candid. And he's like, well, you have to do it. And I was like, well, why do I have to do it? And he was just like, because it's a job. And you're a director. And you have to work. And I was like, okay. And he was like, and it's a great book. I'm like, it is a great book. And he's like, and it's a new generation. I'm like, it is a new generation. And then he asked, well, what are you going to do about that ending? And I said, Brian, I know you revolutionized horror films with that ending. That jump scare, which was the greatest jump scare. And I said, I've already accepted I'll never be as good as your jump scare, but you're right, I need a job, and I think I'll try. He's like, fine. So I went to the studio, and I said, look, to take this job, you guys have to give me a good enough writer that we can find a good jump scare, because I am not putting my career in jeopardy over this. Yeah, famous last words. I took the job, and I found out, oh, we were supposed to shoot in 6 weeks. Not good. I also found out that the script, I needed to do a whole reworking of the script, so I hired my best friend, Scott Silver, who wrote The Fighter, and for an obscene amount of money. And now I want to get you guys jealous. In the hundreds of thousands of dollars for a week of work is what Scott Silver made. So you guys are all figuring out what your career path is. You're going to be Hollywood writers, and you're going to call me, and I'm going to get you a lot of money, because that's what I do for my friends. You know what Scott said? You need a jump scare. I'm like, I know I need a jump scare. That's why I'm paying you so much money to get me a goddamn jump scare. So I was shooting, and Scott and I were desperately rewriting, and we needed a jump scare that was integral to the story and that kind of fell along classic horror lines. And so I was just looking at tons of jump scares. Ridley Scott's Alien, when the gooey, toothy, bloody alien shoots out of John Hurt's stomach. Do you remember that? That's a good jump scare. Spielberg's Jaws. I was a kid, they're underwater, remember? They've got the flashlight. All of a sudden the head comes out. That's a jump scare. Carpenter, Halloween. He's in the house. That's a jump scare, right? You don't know where it comes from. So keep that in mind, guys. Classically trained, horror, jump scare, right? We're trying to at least do a little bit of what Brian De Palma did. I discovered the rich and scary history of birth scenes in horror. We saw Lars von Trier's The Kingdom. Do you guys remember the show? It was great. So basically it was in a hospital, and there's this trailer, and there's all these horrible images. There's like a girl who's like in a bloody room. She's full of blood. She's holding a bloody organ. It's totally scary and weird. There's a guy holding a decapitated head by its hair, and then all of a sudden, bang, you see a woman giving birth. And what's coming out is a grown, older man's face and head. It's scary, okay? And I was like, this is great. So I pulled that out, and then I pulled Cronenberg's The Fly, where Gina Davis is giving birth, and it all seems fine, and then it kind of doesn't seem fine, and all of a sudden, there's a larva that comes out. I was like, okay, this is great. So we came up with a really good idea, which was Sue is in labor. Things seem normal, then they're not so normal, then she's giving birth. And it's either, so you're figuring it out, it's either Carrie's hand or it's Carrie comes out, just something like horrifying. Tell them to the studio. We send them clips of The Fly, Alien, Kingdom, The Game of Thrones. They're like, this is great. This is so scary. Oh, my God, you guys have the answer. Full speed ahead to production. You know, I'm like, that's what they always say. Then something came up as we were full speeding ahead to production, as we were full speeding ahead to release, as we were all losing our minds trying to get this goddamn thing done. They wouldn't or they couldn't articulate it at first. When you have to shoot I was like, the what? Finally, one guy ventured, oh, do you really want to shoot the hand coming out of and there were giggles, then silence. And then finally, whisper, the vajayjay. I said, what? The hole. I said, what? Oh, other euphemisms, the coochie, the beaver, the hoo-ha, the cooter. I was like, oh my God, is this the 1950s? Hadn't we had the vagina monologues? I mean, literally where the point was to say the word vagina. I mean, weren't these guys straight? I mean, it's always questionable. Hadn't they been fantasizing about touching, going down on, and fucking vaginas? Weren't they married? Didn't they have kids? Presumably wives that had vaginas that they had had sex with at some point, and their kids came out of those vaginas? And weren't they all in the birth room, and don't they have pictures of them around their wives' vaginas when the kids came out? So why couldn't they say vagina about a fictional birth scene that didn't even show a vagina? I hadn't mentioned vagina. It wasn't in any of the clips that I sent. Not in The Fly, not in Alien, not in Game of Thrones. You don't show the hole. It's not a shot that you do. I mean, you could. I mean, we're curious people, but you just don't do it. It doesn't work. It's not a scene about a vagina. And the truth is, guys, look, the thing about a jump scare is, it's about the thing you're not looking at coming out and getting you. You don't want to be looking at the hole and having the thing come down the birth canal. It's not going to scare you. You're either going to get aroused or you're going to have a jump scare, guys. You ain't getting both. I'm aiming for jump scare, as Brian De Palma did. Anyway, to show the vagina, oh, now we're back to that word, pornography. If I had used the rape scene to violate you, that would have been pornographic. If I would shoot the vagina, I would be pornographic. Well, that's not what I wanted, right? And in fact, actually, if I went to the X-rated theater, maybe those guys would have shown the vagina, but that's not a jump scare. So, even though I may have a vagina, I'm not going to weigh in on that. And even though I may like vaginas, and I'm not going to weigh in on that, in my career, I've been around a lot of vaginas. I've never once filmed the vagina. I've never once been tempted. I've never done it secretly, done it overtly. It's never been a problem. So the problem ain't here, right? So they loved the scene. They needed a jump scare. The release was 5 weeks away. They were so full of fear about the vagina that they refused for me to shoot it. Instead, they came up with another scene that didn't work, that wasn't a jump scare, and they made me shoot it. I was like, guys, it doesn't work. We shot it, rescreened it, it didn't work. Oh, now we have less time. Now they say, we need that scene. Can we have that scene? Oh, absolutely. But we really want to know how you're going to shoot it. I got it, guys. You want to know how I'm going to shoot it. You want to know where the camera's going to be. It's fine. So I wrote it. I storyboarded it. I spent 3 days with actors testing how I was going to shoot it. Never done this in my life. Every angle known to mankind and female kind. There's really obvious stuff. You got a woman, you got a birth canal, you got legs. You shoot this way at her face, you shoot that way at what comes out. If you're lucky, you get a lateral angle, maybe you get a top angle. You don't shoot that angle. The other thing I did was I ordered the most sophisticated full body prosthetic. I mean, this thing was hot, right? It had tits, it had like stomach, it had arms, it had legs, and it laid over the lady, and it had a hole. There was no vaginas that were put in danger in the shooting of this scene. The clock was ticking, we shot it, they loved it. Now, I'll tell you what was interesting. The guy was like, so you're going to shoot just before I went to shoot. So you're going to shoot towards the vagina, but not at the vagina. I was like, yeah, that's right. But not at the, I was like, no, that's right. And then he said excitedly, can you believe that we're all at a work meeting and we're saying the word vagina? I was like, yes, I can. And then he said it, vagina, vagina, vagina. It was a moment of glory and emancipation. He enjoyed it. We shot it, they tested it, the audience loved it, they loved it. For a while, that was our ending. Then they decided that could not be our ending. It was too polarizing. The fear of the vagina had returned. They were very freaked out. Oh, and that guy, I usually don't tell this part of it, but I kind of have to. I walked on set, and that guy was up between the legs of the prosthetic, pointing his iPhone at the hole, taking a picture. There you go. So what does that tell us, dear students, about sexual and gender inequality, women's desire in bodies, and how Hollywood and beyond reflects and shapes culture? Is it any wonder that we as women struggle to get jobs, to be represented, and to make content in an industry where some men, not all, because you guys are fantastic, have a hard time even saying the word vagina, allowing a vagina to be in the scene, and where female pleasure is terrifying to them. Terrifying. They want to fuck it, but they're terrified of it having pleasure and having autonomy and having power. I'm telling you guys, I've been living this for a long time. This is what's underneath American culture. There's a tremendous fear around female bodies, around female pleasure, and around female power. And it is causing inequality, and it's not going anywhere. And why does it matter? Why does it matter? Okay, look at this audience, right? Are you maybe half women? So let's say if you're a minority, person of color, if you're a woman, you're queer, right? You're someone who's clearly suffered at the hands of the powerful, and you have inequality, and you don't have the privilege that you want. It goes without saying to me that this matters. You've been treated unfairly. You don't want to be treated unfairly. You no longer want to be silenced. You want to be heard, and you need change to happen, and you are going to do something about it. Okay? I got it. But what if you're not one of those people? Well, then I would say, even if you're not one of those people, chances are you're going to have mothers, sisters, wives, maybe daughters who are women. You're going to have people in your family who are gay, who are trans, who are people of color. Somebody is going to come into your world who's going to matter. Even if you're privileged, who is not going to be? And it's your obligation to protect them. Now let's go even farther down the line. What if you're like, you know what? I'm never going to know a woman. I'm never going to know a person of color. I don't give a fuck about any of these people. I am straight white male. I'm at a great college. I've got my future ahead of me. The world is my oyster, and screw it, right? Why do I really have to care? I'm even going to make an argument for why you should care. One is seeing the rest of humanity in the world. I imagine you're not only going to live in this town. I imagine you're going to travel the world, you're going to understand cultures, you're going to love story, and you're going to love other people. So I think that there's going to be a widening of your horizons by giving a shit about this. I think the other thing is that the best stories come from diversity. And that doesn't mean that straight white men shouldn't be making the greatest things in the world. It means that all people should be able to make great stories, and that we all should participate in the great making of stories and the great consumption of stories. And the time is now. That's what I meant by intersectionality. Right? We are tired of having power being concentrated at the top, whether that's wealth, whether that's storytelling, whether that's making meaning, whether that's rights, whether that's the protection of your bodies. The time has to end now when there is a select group of people who get all the privileges. We have to share the wealth. Because when we share the wealth and we have equal rights, we have a safer society, and that is safer for all. And the other thing is, you may have the power today, but you may not have the power tomorrow. So if you're selfish, don't think it's going to last. And I do think if you look at the election, and I don't want to get into politics too much, but I've been reading the exit polls, I've been looking at a ton of stuff. I think it's fair to say a number of things happened in this election. One was there was probably a resurgence of white people who said, you know what, I don't think we want so much diversity. We had a black guy in the White House. I don't know that we need a woman. I don't know that we need all these special interests being catered to. I think there was that. I also think that there was a radical attack on female pleasure and female power. I just think it's undeniable to say that in American culture, this is not an ongoing problem. And my speech before was, wow, we got so far, we have a woman president. My speech today is, we got so far, things could change, but they haven't changed yet. And it's time to. Now, I want to give you guys some hope, right? Because this is of great concern. And because I am in the belly of the beast of the business, I want to let you know the EEOC, which is the Equal Opportunity Employment is investigating Hollywood and media making a content for sexism. I don't want to see my business under attack. I love Hollywood and beyond and everything that's involved in it. But I do know, because they're starting to ask people questions and they're investigating, it has created a level of concern. As a result of that level of concern, I think I was telling some of you, I was part of an amazing summit a year ago. Women in film, Sundance, the heads of the industry, the heads of studios, producers, writers and directors, I mean, the top-notch people got together and we said, we have a problem and we have to solve it internally. And we have now come up with, a year later we just met, and I helped design a program of mentorship and sponsorship. You know how men get ahead in the business? Other men. So I'm creating a program along with all of them where we actually are going out to the heads of industry and we're saying it's time to mentor people who need interference in their career at a midway point. And I'm really excited about that. We're also attacking gender bias, right? Unconscious and conscious, which means we're all making mistakes on all kinds of fronts, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's sexuality, and we all could be more sensitive. So, I mean, I make mistakes all the time. So we're all being trained better. The media is critiquing itself. Again, let's go back to how powerful the media is. So basically, right now, you have the New York Times running front page. I don't know if you guys saw, the New York Times had like 50 of us, women who are behind in front of the camera. There's also a ton of documentaries being made. I'm in like the 4%, because that's how often we work. The other half. So the media is turning on itself and exposing itself, which is really great. And what does the future look like? We said there was inequality, and there's been violence against people who are on the lower rungs. And we said that there is storytelling which can correct that. I believe that we are on the move towards correcting it. And I think that we're on the threshold of something really wild. So there's a lot of arguments that as media takes over and we have more power, Adorno talks about this, and they're right about this, that you actually could end up standardizing, commodifying content, right, so that we all want the same thing. Let's say all things are true. Let's say that that actually can happen, right? If you make franchise movies and you have just action-adventure films that are kind of one note and you keep doing the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, and the 6, yeah, we're all going to start wanting the same thing. But let me give you guys the other side, which is amazing to me. With this over-the-top content, right, streaming, suddenly the means of production are in the hands of many more people. It's much cheaper to make content. You don't have to advertise it, where I said that you had to spend $20 million on a movie and then $20 million releasing it. You don't have to spend on the internet. So if you don't have to spend that, you know what happens? There's a desperate need for content. More people can show up, and you have more people who are of a diverse background making more kinds of content. And I just want to give a shout out to some people, because this is your future. That's the Catherine Bigelow. That's the Steve McQueen. That's the Barry Jenkins who made Moonlight. This is in the film side. Ryan Coogler. These are not people who were making content to the extent that they were making it years ago. They're getting access to the means of production. When you move over to the TV and the over-the-top side, you have a Shonda Rhimes, African-American woman. Man, she is making a ton of content. She is changing the face of television, right? African-American women who are the star of these shows. Genji Cohen, Weeds, Orange is the New Black. Have you ever seen anything like Orange is the New Black? You know why it can exist? Because it's on the internet. If it was on a broadcast station, it would be under too much pressure to perform, A, morally, because it would have to sell advertising, and B, it would have to have a certain number of people watching it. The great thing about the internet is many fewer people can watch it. It can justify its existence, and she gets to keep making it, and that's a good thing for you, because that means you have diversity of content. Lena Dunham, Girls. You didn't see anything like that. HBO, same thing. And I do want to give a big shout out to my friend Jill Soloway, who made, you guys watch Transparent? Transparent is very powerful, very good. She has a new show called, as I said, I Love Dick. And now I get to tell you a little bit about it, because I do think it's another one of the game changers. It's based on Chris Krause's book, I Love Dick, which you guys should love because it's academic. She was married to a guy who was an academic. She was a failed filmmaker. They went to, he got a retreat or a, what is it when you guys go away? Sabbatical. But it was a sabbatical, but he was part of a group with Dick Hebdige. You guys know who Dick Hebdige is? Okay, good. Famous professor, right? So he was going to study kind of under him. And he went, and the wife, Chris Krause, this is all documented, got obsessed with Dick Hebdige. And she started writing letters to Dick Hebdige about wanting to fuck him. And she and her husband wrote the letters. And she and her husband, who hadn't been having sex, started having sex again to the letters. Okay? So the letters are in the house, they're fucking to the letters. Jill shot the pilot, you should download it on Amazon, and I shot the episode after Jill. And I can just tell you, there's a butch cocksucking scene, and I'm sure you don't know what that is, but you will. And there's a gorgeous scene where my two beautiful actors, and I don't want to give too much away because I do think I probably have to be a little bit confidential. It is sexual, there are letters, there's fantasy, it's hetero, it's hot, and you know what? You haven't seen anything like this anywhere. So what Jill is doing, what we're all trying to do, is basically diversify content and bring you everything. And we want to transcend the male gaze, not because we don't love men, we love men, but because we want to give you female desire and the female body in ways that you have never seen it before. So, my feeling is we are on the verge of a breakthrough. As Jenji Cohen, creator of Orange is the New Black, told me, talent with all sorts of genitalia can make money and be successful. That's not about money, that's about pleasure. So, I love my business, and I think my business is reflective of some deeper problems in the culture, and I do believe that our business of storytelling can change those things. But you guys have got to get out there, and we've got to fight back for what just happened a couple days ago.